Welcome to The Exchange. I'm Dan Riley. The Exchange is a streaming internet talk show and podcast of interviews with noteworthy people about their lives, ideas, and current events. This week I sit down with Salam, a defector from the Syrian army currently living in Istanbul. During our conversation, Salam talks about growing up in Syria, his reasons for leaving the Syrian military, his escape from Syria into Turkey, and the rise of the extremist group ISIS. As a side note, Salam has chosen to use an abbreviated name to protect his identity. Welcome to the show. Today I'm sitting down with Salam in Istanbul, Turkey. Salam is a refugee from Syria. Salam, first, thank you for taking the time just to talk and share your story with the listeners.
Thank you for having me with you.
Thank you. I'd like to start, as we were talking about, just by kind of learning a little bit about your life, your upbringing. Where were you born in Syria? And tell me a little bit about your upbringing and childhood.
Yes. I was born in the city of Aleppo in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
I took on my elementary school and my middle school, also my high school in Aleppo. Later on, I studied the English-Arabic translation humanity faculty in Homs city, in the middle of Syria. I graduated in 2010. After that, I went to the army. It was a compulsory service that every Syrian male has to do. Every Syrian male without money or who is not an only child, So I went to army. After that, the uprising against the regime broke out in 2011 in March. And because of that, our military service was extended indefinitely. But after serving a while, I decided to quit the army and go on in my life.
Tell me about the beginning of what happened in Syria, the uprising, the beginning of the civil war. Did you see that coming? Was that something that you could feel within the population was something that was likely?
After the peoples of Tunisia, Egypt, and Yemen broke their dictatorship shackles and started to take to streets in order to express themselves, we had that sense in Syria, we had that feeling that something might happen also in the country. And it started with small groups shouting freedom, shouting democracy, demanding for, the least civil rights that we were prevented to have during 40 years of Assad family ruling. After that, the uprising started to grow bigger and bigger, like a snowball. And it remained peaceful and armless for around 6 or 7 months. And that was recorded by the Syrian president himself. He admitted that. But after that, it started to become more and more armed. We saw weaponry flowing into the country, and we witnessed military actions done by the regime, and it metamorphosed to the form that you are seeing now on TV.
You'd mentioned the civil rights. What sort of civil rights or reforms were the people who were protesting against the government interested in?
For example, let's say the people of Homs, when they first took to streets, they demanded the resignation of the the mayor of the city. But because the regime is not used to encounter any form of objection to any small detail of their policy, they started to crack down the protesters, and they used violence. And because of that, the people turned to demand the fall down of the regime. itself. And there are many civil rights who were banned from, like the right to express, liberty of expression, the right to integral elections, free elections, the right of free media that is unsubject to the regime's policies and views. And there are many, and at least that we have an integral judiciary system, and the elimination of corruption, and the elimination also of all forms of violations to the human rights. I might mention in passing the Palmyra prison, which is Tadmor prison, and Sidnaya prison, which represent two of the most vicious prisons in the world.
I want to learn a little bit about what it was like to grow up in Syria. Not having those sort of civil rights, was that something that you and your peers when you were young were asking for or hoping to get at some point in your life? Or was it just sort of taken for granted that this is a dictatorship, it's probably never going to change?
You can say it was taken for granted, but with the arrival of President Bashar al-Assad to power in 2000, we hoped that something will change in the country, that he is an eye doctor, he is well educated, he is open-minded, but all of these ideas turned to be wrong, because he continued the policy of his father. Probably he is just a simple pawn in the regime, and he is not doing that on his own, because the close circle around him is the real player in the country. You can say it was taken for granted, but we hope that some change will take place.
Was there one moment, as you were saying, it sounds like there was a buildup of people calling for freedom, people calling for democracy in the streets. Was there one moment when it went from a few people saying this is what we want to this is the defining moment where the regime knows that the people are serious?
It's the whole thing started in Daraa, southern Syria. And the Syrian media kept hiding the real facts. They kept to air their own propaganda, their own side of the story, or their own version of the story. Stories like armed groups are shooting at protesters, or you can say armed groups are sabotaging the official directories, like the town hall, like the electricity department, like that. So you cannot say there was a definite moment of heat in the uprising because of the media. But we felt that. We had, some people have relatives in Daraa, for example. So we were kept posted about the real story via these connections. Stories from real people on the ground.
And how did you learn that information? If the state controlled the official media outlets, how did you learn information that was accurate?
In Syria, we can watch other TV channels from outside of the country, like Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, those channels who aired the real story about the events here in Syria. And you can say the first martyr in the Syrian uprising also added up to the heat of the people and to the urge of the people to break the shackles. It was in March 18 when the first martyr of Syria was killed, by the regime.
And what's the story with the first martyr? Do you know exactly what happened with that death?
I know he was a protester.
Yeah.
That's all I know.
Yeah.
And some forces in the Syrian opposition adopt the date 15 March as a date of their revolution. others adopt the 18th of March because the first martyr was killed in 18th of March.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about you a little bit, and it sounds like you were in the army and probably were hoped to be part of the military opposition to the protests. Did you make a decision at some point that you're not going to support the regime anymore and it's time for you to leave the country, or what was your thinking that brought you to Turkey?
From the beginning, I was against the regime because I knew the real story. And I didn't take any decision to join any armed group because I don't believe in killing. And on the contrary, I believe that killing will make the situation go from frying pan into fire, as you say. So when I felt down to my bones sure that there will be no release from army, I made my decision to leave the army and go on with my life. As I told you, I chose Turkey because we had relatives, and I believe that Turkey represents a good model for the countries of the Middle East in terms of economy, in terms of democracy, let's say. And I also had my sister already here in Istanbul.
Was it difficult to get out of Syria at that point? Did you have to hide your identity at various points when you were coming in?
Yes, you can say it was a little difficult. But I quit the army with a leave. I had a leave in my hand. They signed permissions to leave the site. I got it for 48 hours. Mm-hmm. And I was the first one of my unit to quit. So I took my leave. I was serving in Sueda, southern Syria, nearby Dara. I took the trip to Damascus, and from Damascus went to Aleppo via the desert road by bus. And it took me around 15 hours to get to home. It was a long, long trip because of the barriers and because of the changing of the route. Because the bus driver knew that he had 4 or 5 soldiers aboard. So it's dangerous for soldiers to cross the main road between Damascus and Aleppo via Homs and Hama city, middle of Syria. So he took a different road for us, for our safety, And whenever we come to a Syrian army barrier, I showed my military ID with my leave. It's legal. Everything is legal and official. But when we reached the area in the outskirts of Aleppo, where the Free Syrian Army, it was a stronghold for this Free Syrian Army, I showed my driver's license, and I passed on. There was one soldier who suspected me, but he didn't make any trouble. I said my civil ID is lost.
Did you know if you were caught, if let's say someone from the military got an idea and learned about what you were doing,
the Free Syrian Army,
either the official army or the Free Syrian Army, would there be repercussions for you? Did you know what would happen to you?
If I was caught by the, I wasn't afraid of the regime's army because, as I told you, I had my, my official leave. It was signed by the colonel of our battalion, who later, defected also.
Interesting.
But the dangerous part is on the side of the FSA, because FSA or Free Syrian Army, when they capture or they sense a soldier by his appearance or his words, or if he's getting back to his side, he's dead.
Yeah.
But if he's still starting his leave, they might give him a chance. I was prepared, to any possibility. I said in myself, okay, if they, if I get discovered, I'll tell them, okay, I'm leaving, and I'm not getting back. I got ready to all the possibilities.
And you mentioned that there were other people with you and other people since then, it sounds like, who have defected. How many official Syrian military people have defected and either left the country entirely or have joined the FSA?
I can't tell you a very credible number, but they say that Syrian army lost 70% of its population.
It's gone. Has left.
Yes, it's gone. Either killed or missing or defected.
Mm-hmm.
So I cannot give you a certain number. It cannot depend on me on that. As I said, the dangerous part was on the FSA part. Mm-hmm. And in the bus we were 4, but we weren't in the same unit. Mm-hmm. I served in the electronic surveillance specialty. Mm. I was neither infantry nor artillery. Others, there was that soldier who had been discovered, and they brought him out of the bus. I don't know what happened to him later. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe there is something bad happened to him because he also was leaving his side. Mm.
And for people who are relatively unfamiliar with the details of what's going on or what has gone on in Syria, how has the FSA fared against the regime? Tell us a few of the details that stick out in your head as being unbelievable or incredibly important about what's happened over the last few years.
You mean regarding military actions?
The civil war, military actions, how well the FSA has been able to fight against the regime, what sort of retaliation they've received from Bashar.
Mm-hmm. I believe that FSA also made several mistakes by gathering in civil areas, which gave the regime's air force a pretext to do more shelling over the civilians and so on. The FSA started to be formed by those officers who defected from it when they were manned in Daraa city. Their mind apparently was full of ideas as those are terrorist groups we are going to fight, those are sabotaging the country. And when they confronted those terrorist groups, in brackets, they were shocked because of the difference between the official version of the story and the real facts on the ground. That's why the shock played a role in making many officers and soldiers defect from the army. They started to form the FSA, and later on they got weaponry. They got also, it wasn't to be done without the support of the people, because those protesters taking to streets supported any force, any power that could protect them from the shots of the regime's soldiers. So it wasn't to be done without the support of the people. They started little and they grew in number, in weaponry. And as you see the picture right now, it's a multilateral war. Mm-hmm.
And most of the arms that they've received, the people in the FSA, to fight against the regime, where are they coming from, and how are they obtaining what they're using to fight?
They come from brokers, and there are many sources, from brokers, from countries, and also from those war spoils when they attack a military site also. But now the FSA is in a real trouble because they are fighting on two fronts. They are fighting against the extremists and also against the regime.
Mm-hmm. And the extremists is one of the other subjects that I wanted to talk to you about. Is that something that you could have possibly foreseen being such a lethal force within Syria when you left the country a few years ago? Or does it not particularly surprise you that an organization like ISIS is doing what they're doing in Syria?
Would you clarify your question more? It's multi-sided.
Sure. Are you surprised that a force like ISIS has arisen in Syria and has had the ability to do everything that they've been able to do in Syria?
No, I wasn't surprised, because the revolution was taking on the Islamic form over time. And the extremism was expected to come to being for two reasons. First of all, because of the regime's way of tackling the uprising. Secondly, for some people in Syria are willing to embrace such ideas like the Islamic Caliphate, and you know the story, Islamic Caliphate and the Islamic regulation system. But I think the main reason for this extremism to come up in Syria is the regime's way of tackling the uprising. And the Syrian regime, inside the regime, they are very sectarian. You know about the Syrian society and the tissue of the society. We have many sects, we have many religions and races. So, and the president being from a different sect from the majority of the Syrian people, created that sense of sectarianism in the deeds of the regime, which in fact is true. Because before the uprising, anyone who is in the intelligence can control a whole department, or have his relative or her relative hired in any place in the country. They are powerful, especially when they come from people connected to the regime. That's why you see the extremism here in Syria.
And with the sort of brutality that you've seen from the government and the military of Bashar, talk about what he's done. I know everyone talks about how he's used chemical weapons against the citizens. What are the specific types of weapons that he's used, and how many people has he killed?
I don't know about the weapons, but the death toll reached 1,500 people. I wasn't there to speak about it, but I know that they used chemicals to kill those families and children. And there is one thing that is worth mentioning here, which is the statement made by Buthayna Shaban, the counselor in the counselor of Bashar al-Assad, who claimed that these killed children and families were originally kidnapped from Latakia and driven all the way to rural Damascus in order to be killed. I mean, her version of the story is very ridiculous. It's very funny. It cannot be believed by a child. She said that those terrorists kidnapped some people and some children from Latakia, which is under the regime's control, all the way across Homs, which is also under the regime's control, to rural Damascus to execute them. It's a ridiculous idea. It says, I am a liar, and you have to believe that.
Right. And now, with everything that's happened, has it surprised you how broken Syria appears to be right now? Did you think it would last as long as it's lasted since you left the country?
Well, I was saying that yesterday when we had a relative visiting us. I said everything, when you look to the situation right now in Syria and think about it 3 years ago, you feel like you are in a nightmare or a dream. You cannot. Sometimes I don't believe that. Is this all of this taking place in Syria? Am I sober? That's what I think. Because the size of the destruction in Syria cannot be believed to have taken place in 3 years. It's very short notice. So sometimes I feel I'm still asleep, or I don't know how to describe it.
Mm-hmm. And if you could play king for a day, or you could play God for a day, and you had control over the behavior of different governments in the world, how would you like to see the world community respond or react to what's going on in Syria?
If I'm to play God, I don't know if there is a God. If there is a God, I wish He takes care of the people. He must be seeing what is going on here in Syria. Some people do pray, please God, support us, and please God, make us victorious in this war. What are you talking about? I mean, religion sometimes, holds you from taking action. So, if there is a God, such a thing haven't taken place from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And are there any countries that you've seen that have behaved in a way towards the Syrian people that you view as being very noble? Different countries that have helped the people you think should be helped in Syria?
I believe the most noble part is so far being played by Turkey here, by the government, and regardless from some events where Turkish people protested against the Syrian presence in Turkey. Regardless from that, the Turkish government is so far totally supportive to the Syrian refugees. Unlike other Arab countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, which were supposed to be more helpful. And also, we have to mention the European countries. I'm talking about when they tackle our issue from the humanitarian view, when they accept the refugee applications and allow Syrians to go there, and they do not deport them so far. In fact, 2 days ago, or yesterday to be more accurate, our relative applied for Germany, applied to go to Germany as a refugee. And they said he can come back to the consulate and have his visa and get away with it.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the future a little bit and what you believe is possible now, given what's happened in Syria. As you were mentioning, it seems like you're living through a nightmare, or that you're still asleep or something for the past few years. What is a realistic hope for what can change in Syria over the next 5 years, in your opinion?
The realistic hope. The realistic hope is that the fall down of the regime must be inevitable. That's something that has to happen. We cannot live with this regime. Neither we can with the extremism. So in 5 years, I believe the situation will turn to take a better shape, a better form on the Syrian soil, because we are creating a big problem in the region to the whole world. If the crisis goes on for maybe another year, there will be wars breaking out, and we don't want that to happen. And we also want the international community to take action to stop the war, to take actions also against the regime to step down, and so that all the people who were displaced to come back to their country.
The last thing I want to ask you, last question I want to ask you is, if someone who is listening to this, who is in Syria right now and is in a similar situation to the situation you were in 4 years ago and wants to get out, are there resources, are there people, are there countries that you would recommend them try to connect with to help their life and to potentially get out of the country?
Countries or organizations, or everybody has his own plan. Some people do leave the country to go to Europe and ask for asylum. Some people are satisfied with staying here and finding a job. I cannot recommend places like Jordan or Iraq or Egypt, because they are already rejecting us and they are already in a crisis, in economical crisis. So they might come here to Turkey, but they have to take into their consideration that if a foreigner, whenever there is a foreigner, that foreigner should, live under that country's rules. So if there is somebody hearing me now and wanting to get out of the country, he can go wherever he likes, but he has to bear in his mind that he must be respectful, he has to be polite, and he has not to make any trouble to anybody else. That's it.
Salam, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today.
Thank you, and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in learning more about The Exchange, want to listen to episodes online, or would like to reach out to the show, feel free to visit the show's website at theexchangeshow.com.